Hello and welcome to another autumn tutorial with a mushroom. For this painting I will use 100% cellulose paper, Aurora, cold pressed texture and three main watercolors, Payne's Grey, Yellow Ochre and Burnt Sienna. I use these colors a lot and they are must-haves for the autumn palette. I will use two brushes, number 8 by Escoda Perla and number 2 by Escoda Reserva. You can use other synthetic brushes that you have. Now let's move to the painting. You can find the reference photo and the scan of my sketch on my Patreon by the link in the description. Before I start painting, I analyze where the darkest areas are, and I see that it's under the cap of the mushroom and the stem is a pretty light area. So the darkest part will be under the cap on the right side. I will use color mixes of the three colors I showed you in the beginning, and now I will prepare a main bottle of the mix Burnt Sienna plus Yellow Ochre. Also a dark brown mix of Burnt Sienna and Payne's Grey. Before I start painting, I remove the pencil lines with a kneadable eraser. I will work in wet on wet technique, so it means that first I have to cover the area with a clean water. I have some leftovers of the paint on my brush, so it's not very bad because we will use the same color shades as I have on the brush. And now, while the surface is still wet, I will apply some colors I have on the palette, letting them blend on the surface. I apply different shades from bright brown with Burnt Sienna to the dark brown with Payne's Grey, and I'm carefully lifting the color on the surface. So you see that I have pretty wet surface right now, so I'm just moving the color, creating these edges of the cap of the mushroom. I keep in mind that the cap of the mushroom is a mid-tone, so I have to make it not too dark. You can add drops of clean water to the wet surface, so the water will push the color around, creating nice watercolor effects. I leave the cap dry and I will move to painting the stem. And I will start with covering it with the clean water first, and I will use more cold mix with Payne's Grey and water. Also, if you have ultramarine, you can add a little bit of ultramarine. Since the cap is still wet and we don't want these two parts blend, I will leave just a thin line between these two areas. So I will try to not drag the color from the painted part, avoiding this area. I start applying the color to the wet surface, and now I just need to create some basic tone for this stem. Now I start building up the color right below the cap. But while the surface is wet, it's really hard to make dark shadows. So we need to create first layer, and then when it will get dry, we will apply some more color. Now I'm just creating this texture of the mushroom, moving the color towards the bottom. When the watercolor gets dry, it looks lighter than initially applied on the wet surface. So now I see that I want to reapply the color on the cap, making it a bit darker in some areas. And now I'm basically connecting the still wet areas so the color would nicely blend. If you see that the surface is already dry, you can just reapply the color on the whole surface of the mushroom cap. I come back to the stem, applying more and more darker color. Since the surface is still wet, we can just build a little bit of intensity, but of course we can make it darker when the surface will get dry. But now, while the surface is still wet, I can just make it more intense. And right now I already show that the shadow are darker on the right side. So we have light source on the left. So on the right side of the mushroom will be darker areas. Now I have to wait until it will get dry, and meanwhile I can prepare a darker brown mix of burnt sienna and Payne's Grey. Now I'm mixing yellow ochre with the colors left on the palette. Basically it's a bit of burnt sienna and Payne's Grey, creating just more intense but not so brownish color. And I start painting the left part of the mushroom. I leave this thin white line separating the cap and the part that below in the shadow, because this white line will help visually to separate these dark and light areas of the mushroom. Now I start applying darker color with a more Payne's gray in the mix, and I carefully lift the color towards the stem, because on the right side of this area will be the darker part, so I'm just lifting the color. The color mix at this point shouldn't have a lot of water inside. It's more like a coffee consistency if we're talking about three different consistencies of watercolor, tea, coffee, and butter. So it's something in the middle. And the surface shouldn't be too wet, because now you see that I'm lifting the color and this lighter part on the top, it still remains light, and this darker part remains dark. It doesn't blend on the surface of the paper. Now I can reapply some color, because this part of the inside of the cap, it should be darker than the top of the cap. And now I need to reapply the color to make it more intense. You can reapply it right below this white line, so it will highlight the contrast. If you see that the color is traveling too much, you can just clean your brush and dry it with a paper towel and just lift the color from the surface like I'm doing right now. The area on the right side will be much darker, like I told you earlier. And I will start with the dark mix, but still I leave this white line between the cap and the shadow area to highlight this contrast between dark and lighter part. Now it already looks pretty good, but we need to make a bit darker the area on the stem right below the cap. And since we don't want to leave some rough edges, I just wet the surface of the stem with a clean water. Now I will apply a darker color right below the cap, and this dark area will blend with the wet surface that I created right now. Now I see that the color is too dark, because the darkest area of this painting will be on the right side, the area of the inside part of the cap. So the stem should be a bit lighter. That's why I'm just lifting the color with a clean brush, and now I'm just creating more smooth edges and not so dark color on the paper. And now I can clean my brush again and drag the color towards the bottom of the mushroom, creating more even color. Also, I can add some Payne's gray at the bottom, creating some details. At this point, it already looks like almost finished painting, but I want to add a bit more intensity to the cap to make this object look more realistic. So I create this mix of burnt sienna and Payne's gray, and I use wet on dry technique. And somewhere dry on dry technique, using dry brush, I'm creating this texture of the mushroom. I keep diversity of the color, creating different shades and also avoiding painting some light areas. I can come back to the shadows part and reapply the color because it gets lighter and lighter, and I see that I need to darken it. Even though I darken the stem under the cap, the right side of the mushroom is still darker than the stem. I can add some darker spots and dots onto the cap of the mushroom to create more details. At this point our painting is almost done. Now I have to take a look and decide if I want to add some darker details and some lines, like for example to highlight the edges of the object and to darken some shadows. You can share your painting on Instagram and tag my account to be featured on my stories. You can also participate in my autumn marathon and get my exclusive sticker pack if you share 3 paintings by the prompts by the 10th of November. See details below. If you like painting this mushroom, you can also join my Skillshare class and paint fly agaric with me. I hope to see you in the class.